Harimi, harimi, al tirai, harimi, al tirai. Imri le'arei Yehuda, hine Elokeichem. Harimi, harimi, al tirai.
All right, on page 244, the bilingual edition, Simon Kuf Tes, in the Simon Reb Chaim Freelander. So we're talking about Hashem's creation, how He creates things. Specifically, we were getting into how Hashem creates evil, because faced with a little bit of a paradox, that in a way, God creates everything. Not in a way, God does create everything. But we also said that God doesn't create evil directly. So how could that be? How could it be that God creates everything, but He doesn't create evil directly? So we're seeing that the way that God creates evil is different than the way He creates everything else. In fact, we brought a proof. We cited a proof from a verse. When it comes to good, it says, let me just go back to the verse here, in Kuf Hey, in Simon Kuf Hey, we said that Osei Shalom, He makes peace, Uborei Ra, and He creates evil. We used a different word for peace than for evil. So we're going to see a different word of creation. I mean, there's different words that you can use in Hebrew for creation. So the word that we used for creation of good and everything else is different than the word that we use for creation of evil. So now we're going to discuss how Hashem created evil. So let's see what part. We actually, one thing that we did mention is that evil comes about into the world through Hashem hiding Himself. So we started to answer the question, but we're saying there's no separate creation of evil that God makes. God doesn't make something evil, but rather He has His emanations, His hashpah, and He withholds some of it, and through that withholding, through that lack of withholding some of His hashpah, evil comes about. And we said to the degree that Hashem withholds His emanations, that is the degree that evil will come into the world. For example, when Hashem puts all of His hashpah, all of His spiritual energy into the world, then a person is totally healthy. If he would withhold all of his hashpah, withhold all of his emanations, then he would die. If he would withhold some of the emanations, then the person would be sick, right? Because that's a lack of some of the life force. So now we're going to continue talking about that topic. Amr HaNeshama, ask the neshama. All right, Tam Rishon, the first thing he said, Vasheni Shiadat Alamrili. So originally the seichel, the intellect, said he's going to tell us two things. So the first things you already told me about how evil is not directly created from Hashem. Mahu, what's the second thing you want to tell me? Amr Seichel, says the intellect.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I'm just, it's kind of more from the lashon on the bottom, but that which Hashem, so everything I'm saying I have no clue what I'm talking about, but that which He could be,
join the club.
That he could sort of hold back His hashpah, that itself is a bria, like the way it's on the bottom. Boirei ra, meaning Hashem doesn't just withhold His influence, He created the ability to withhold His influence. That itself had to be a chiddush.
I don't know about that specifically, but soon he's gonna talk about how the creation of evil was actually in two steps.
Okay,
because he's gonna ask a question very soon that the withhold. Well, I'll say it now. We'll see. We'll read it inside. But he's gonna ask a question that withholding some of the goodness, that's good if you wanna, something that's already created, you want to limit it. So let's say a person being sick. So then you're limiting some of the hashpah to make that person sick. But we find in creation that there are creations which are totally evil. So how does Hashem make those creations which are totally evil? How can you withhold hashpah? The withholding of emanations can't actively create something. So that is what he's going to ask soon.
Okay.
And then if you want, actually, this rabbi here, who in the English Hebrew one has like 2 pages explaining this. And there's a big footnote from Reb Chaim Freelander over there.
Okay.
Coming up. Okay. So Amar Seichel, kasher nidaktik b'metzius hadvarim. When we look at the details of this thing, nimtzu she'ein haros elav sedi hatovas atzmon. Evil is only the lack of good, of these good emanations. If you take all the good things in creation, v'navin gederim, and understand their gedarim, their limits, and know evil and understand all of their limits, you would see that evil is only the lacking of the good, like we said. Al-Kain, therefore, so we can't say that there are 2 separate emanations. But rather, we're saying that there's one hashpah, Hashem is good, just putting good in the world. When some of that good is lacking, evil will come about. But don't think that God's going, good creation, bad creation, good creation, bad creation, active hashpahs at the same time. That's not what God's doing. Because God does not directly associate himself with evil. Amra neshama, says the soul. Im kain, if so, ha'olam hazeh she'anu roim shehu morkav vadai. We see in the world that there's a combination of good and evil. Sheish bo tovos v'ros. Nitzdarch leimer shenivra b'shnei drachim. B'hashpah u'bitul hashpah. So we're going to have to say that the good things in the world are created with a positive emanation, and the bad things in the world are created with Hashem withholding his positive emanations. Okay, so far so good. Amar seichel. V'chidavar tama huzeh. Is this a crazy thing? Zapasha, this is obvious. V'yav shalachlok. You can't argue on this. Ki kol ma'ashehu tov. Everything that's good, ma'ashpa aso yizbarchu noilad, comes from Hashem directly, his emanations. V'chol ma'ashehu ra me'eder shavu bitula nolad vadai. And everything that is evil is withholding his shefa, is withholding his emanations. V'im anu roim tovos v'ros. And if we see good and evil, ne'eda vadai sheshtayim heina asa lokim. We know that both were created from Hashem, good and evil. His shviya v'sidak shifo, his direct emanation and his withholding of it. V'nivru shnei hadbrios shezachar. We created these two creations. So far what we have is that everything obviously is created from Hashem, and we shouldn't come to think that there's some other force that's creating evil, God forbid. But we're learning that God does not create a positive force of evil and create a positive force of good and a negative force of evil, but rather Hashem has one emanation that's all good, and by withholding some of that, evil comes about. Okay, very Kabbalistic enough for you this early Sunday morning? Good. Good. Now comes a question to make it harder. Amra Hanashama, says the soul. I don't understand this. Right? So you see this, the neshama. We're allowed to not understand also if the neshama here doesn't understand. Now that you're saying through Hashem's emanations, Hinei Tov, that creates good. How can you say through withholding emanations you could create evil? We keep saying that withholding the good emanations create evil. How could that be? How could an act of withholding make something, create something? Hine, me'eder lo yivali mitzius. From withholding something, you can't create anything. Vim kain, if so, lo nimalin me'achas mishtayim. You have two. How can you get out of this paradox? Oh, shetzarach lo mishakadosh baruch hu bar hara b'kum aseh mamish. Either you have to say that God directly creates evil, oh shelo haya ev shelo brio mitzius, or evil can't exist. You hear the question he has? He's saying that you keep telling me that evil is from a withholding of God's hashpah, from withholding of his emanations. But how could that be how could an act of evil creation, we see there's evil in the world, so how could you create something, how could Hashem create something from withholding of something?
It makes sense. If you look at a recipe and you withhold one ingredient, you create something else.
How do you do that?
Well, if you don't, if you're taking...
But you created something, but there were other things there first, right?
Like if you don't use yeast in bread, it's become matzah. It doesn't rise. It doesn't have
But you still had the bread in there. You had other things. You did other things.
But you didn't create what you were intending to create. So you're withholding something. You create something else.
Let's assume good point. Let's assume you were creating a person. You withheld some of the compassions that his soul should have had, and you ended up having Hitler or something.
Right.
That's a better point.
Okay, how do you create the example he uses here? I don't know if it's a good example. Let's say the Yetzer Hara. How does Hashem create the Yetzer Hara? Let's say there's no good in there. How does Hashem do that? His example is germs. I don't know why he says germs, because I've heard germs could have, or a disease, cancer, something like that.
He's making an interesting point.
What?
Darren. I hear his point.
But there's good in it. Matzah is good.
Yeah, but if you make a house without nails, it'll crumble. I mean, it's like anything you take out one ingredient, it doesn't become what it's intended to be, and it becomes deficient.
That's fine. But we're asking, how does Hashem create something which is total? You're saying deficient, which is meaning, I think what it
broken.
means is
It's broken.
I mean, there is good here, but
it's broken.
But it's broken.
It's a broken good.
It's a broken good. But we're talking about, how do you make something which is totally evil, 100% evil?
Without compassion.
So what he says is something like disease, bacteria. I was thinking more the Satan. There's an angel, that a certain malach that tries to get people to do evil, of tumah, impurity. Right? There's objective evil, not just a human being who is Even every human being has probably something good, a little tiny, tiny, tiny bit, and corrupted himself. But there are certain spiritual creations which are totally evil. There's diseases in the world, destruction, fires, and that kill people. And
No, there's sadistic people that don't what you said don't have compassion. That 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 can create an evil person. A sadistic person
would you say that that evil person is 1,000% evil?
could be. It's possible.
Never did one good thing in his life?
It's possible.
Yeah, you think so? Could be.
I'm just saying it's possible. I don't know certainty, but someone who
Right. So here what he's saying
has
is,
no feelings and no compassion. It creates a formula for something that could be evil.
but it also says that Hashem is Rachamav al kol ma'asav. Hashem has mercy on all of his creations. Saying that means even on the totally evil ones.
Right.
So it seems like he's talking about here. His example here is like germs and disease, which is a physical thing. And then the other example is, as I was just thinking, is the Satan. Something which is its goal is to do evil here. I think also the spiritual forces, we know in Judaism, let's say we're thinking in physical terms, but I think it's easier maybe to perceive in spiritual terms. We know that there are malachim, which are good, totally good, and we know there are certain spiritual creations that are totally 100% evil. They're here to mess us up, right? There's no redeeming quality about them, just that God created them because we have to overcome them to maybe that. So, but
That's the
be'etzem,
redeeming quality.
yeah, but
we have to overcome them, right?
right, but I think in their essence, it seems like there's no redeeming quality. They're totally evil. So he's just asking now, how did God, you can't say that God, to create a sick person, or let's say a human being, right? A human being is objectively good, but he's saying an evil person, it's a little hard. I think when we say like midos, a person's character traits, it's a little hard to say because a person has free will when it comes to that. So we're talking about, I'd rather say a sick person. Even let's say a baby that's born with a lot of sicknesses, that's maybe perhaps Hashem holding certain emanations, but he definitely created a human being which is good. He just withheld something. Now the question is how does Hashem create something which is 100% evil by withholding his emanations? Again, this is very complicated, but I think for the answer we'll wait till next week.